Good morning, Yidden. So yesterday we learned a couple of lines in the Gemara, which seemed like a few different, the same teaching being repeated a few times, each time in a bit of a different way. And the basic idea is Ein Kiddush Ela B'Makom Suda, that Kiddush requires that it be done in the presence of a meal. So the Gemara had the statement of people who agreed with that, and then the Gemara had some stories of one person who went from upstairs to downstairs, another person who went to his son-in-law's house or son's house, and then Abaye, who was told by Rabbah, after Kiddush, eat something, because when you go to your host, you might miss out on Kiddush, so eat something now so your Kiddush will count. These little statements, but it leaves a lot unanswered, specifically, how close in proximity do you have to be to the place you're eating? How soon after your Kiddush do you have to eat? How much do you have to eat? None of that is really addressed directly in the Gemara, but in the commentaries all around it, it is addressed. So we didn't learn through all the commentaries. We just touched upon some of the ways in which the Gemara can be read in more than one way. And now when we come to the Alter Shulchan Aruch, he's going to collect for us and present for us in a systemized way all the various different halachas around it that really are derived from the commentaries that surround the Gemara we learned yesterday. So this is Siman Reish Ayin Gimel, chapter 273 in the Shulchan Aruch. So you see there where it says, in the red there, Siman Reish Ayin Gimel, Shehiya Kiddush B'Makom Suda. This chapter will discuss the requirement that Kiddush be recited in the place of the meal, Bayut Sifim, and it has 12 subsections. It's the first page. Yeah, Aleph. Reish Ayin Gimel, yeah, 273. Okay, so I'm reading in the Hebrew, but of course you're welcome to follow along in English. We're going to look at some of the footnotes because they're quite involved, some of them. Ein Kiddush Ela B'Makom Suda. Kiddush is only valid if it is done in the place of one's meal. In Kiddush B'Bayis Zeh, if one made Kiddush in this home, in this building, V'achal B'Bayis Acher, and ate in a different building, whether he had in mind to begin with, while he made Kiddush, that I'm going to be eating in the next building, or whether he had in mind to eat in this house, so he made Kiddush, thinking he's going to eat right here, but then after Kiddush, Nimlach, he changed his mind, to eat somewhere else. So whether he thought he was going to be eating here, and then it so happened he ended up eating somewhere else, or whether to begin with he knew while making Kiddush he's going to be eating somewhere else, he had it in mind, he did not fulfill his obligation in that first Kiddush that he made. He's required to go back, but to return, and to make Kiddush again prior to his eating in that other house. Whether we're talking about the Kiddush on Friday night, or whether we're talking about the Kiddush by the day. I shouldn't say Friday night because the same thing is true of Yom Tov as well, whether it's Kiddush at night or at day. Shenemar, and this law is derived from the verse which reads in Isaiah, Shayahu 58:13. For my digital version, I click on the number and the footnote pops up. That's how I know. But for you, you have to go to the pages at the end where it's printed. Anyway, the Shenemar, as the verse reads, sorry? Yeah, I don't want you to suspect that I know all of Isaiah by heart. The pasuk reads, "The karasa l'Shabbos onig, you shall call Shabbos holy, or delight, or pleasure." Right? And I said yesterday, the simple meaning of the verse is that you should treat Shabbos like a day of delight. But the way the prophet describes that is the karasa, you shall call out. So Dorsha Chacham, our sages derive. B'makam oinek to the Shabbos, in the place of your delight, which is your meal. Shamte kriyas kiddush. That's where you should call out the Shabbos, which is your kiddush. And therefore, ein tzarich leimar. So, therefore, it's needless to say, shem kiddush v'lo yisod acharav. If he made kiddush and he did not eat following his kiddush in that place, klal at all, meaning not just not here, but even not somewhere else, then certainly he hasn't fulfilled his obligation for Kiddush. If he makes Kiddush here and he eats 2 minutes later, but he does so in a different room, we still say he doesn't fulfill his obligation Kiddush. How much more so? Needless to say, if you make Kiddush and you don't eat anything, definitely not fulfill your obligation of Kiddush, and you have to make Kiddush again.
Brachas or nothing.
Yeah, so it was wrong to do so. It was wrong to do so. Okay, halacha beis, next page. Now we get, so this so far is just like a recap from the Gemara with that Tosfos we pointed out, which gave this derivation of karasa l'Shabbos onik, you shall call Shabbos holy. Now let's get more into the weeds of the details of this. Yeah, here, go ahead. Yes. Even in one home, from one room to the next. He made Kiddush in one room, al das, with the intention, to eat in that very room where he made Kiddush. But after his Kiddush, nimlach, he changed his mind, lechal, to eat, in a different room. The same thing is true of going from the main floor to the upstairs floor. Or from the upstairs floor to the main floor of their house. So the glass of Kaddish, you have to go back and make Kiddush again. Again, this is based on our Gemara, in the story of Rav Anan bar Tachlifa, the story we learned where the candle fell. So they went up and made Kiddush again. Now, if you can, go to footnote 5, which is in the last page, the second to last page of the booklet. So it reads there. So the wonderful editors of this new version of the Shulchan Aruch, which I recommend you all get.
Got a couple of volumes up there.
Yeah, I'll show you what it looks like. The wonderful people at Kahas, in partnership with Sichas in English, are working on this monumental project of translating all the out there of Shulchan Aruch with irrigation and footnotes in a clear format, the same way you're looking at the page here. It's very clear with the Hebrew side by side with the English. They really, really did a phenomenal job. They relied heavily on the research of Rabbi Shalom Ber Levin, who is the chief librarian of the Central Chabad Library, who did a similar thing in a Hebrew version, and they're taking his footnotes onto the English. But they really did a good and phenomenal job. So they're not done yet, actually. They're still in the process of printing it. I think they did 10 volumes out of expected 15, 16 of them.
What's the difference between the Shulchan Aruch and the Aruch Shulchan?
The Aruch HaShulchan is for whatever reason, not so popular version of the Shulchan Aruch. In my view, it's not as popular as it should be. Anyway, I was once discussing this with Rabbi Gimple. It's the theories as to why it wasn't popular. It's not as popular. Not as popular as it should be. There are many different codifiers of Jewish law throughout the ages, and some became more popular than others for whatever reason. Obviously, by divine providence. The classic Shulchan Aruch, because he was the first one to really do it, is the Rabbi Yosef Cairo, with the glosses of the Ramah.
See which one.
Right, which is Ashkenazic and the Sephardic custom.
So the
it's very simple.
Includes both.
So the Shulchan Aruch itself is written by Rabbi Yosef Cairo,
Yeah.
and at the same time, he was in Tzvat. At the same time, in Krakow, Poland, the Ramah, Rav Meir Isserlis, had the same idea. Let's simplify all of Jewish law in a very point form. But he discovered that there was someone else already doing it. So he said, I don't have to do it again. That would be like redundant. So he took what he wrote, which is called the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch means set table. And the halachas are set in front of you. And he wrote a gloss called the Mappa, tablecloth. So you have a set table and a tablecloth. And he basically just added, whenever this Ashkenazic custom diverges from this Sephardic custom, he added the Ashkenazic custom. So you read the Shulchan Aruch, you read the text, and then whenever there's a difference in the Ashkenazi or Sephardic, you'll have the Ramah write a line or two in a gloss. And that's the classic Shulchan Aruch. But there are other people who did similar work. The Lavush, the Aruch HaShulchan, another one. I guess the Mishnah Berurah is a variant of that also in some ways. And for whatever reason, those two, the Lavush and the Aruch HaShulchan, didn't become as popular as once discussing with Rabbi Gimple, and his theory is because the Aruch HaShulchan was a rabbi, didn't have a yeshiva. If you don't have a yeshiva, you don't have students, you don't have students to popularize it. Whereas the Mishnah Berurah had a yeshiva, so his students popularized it. It's a good theory. Anyway, okay, so footnote 5, bottom line is they did a very good job in the Alter of Shulchan Aruch here, and recommend to get it. Footnote 5 reads, one may, however, recite Kiddush in one room, wash in another room, and then return and eat in his meal in the room in which he recited Kiddush. This is important because, as we're going to learn, there's an issue with how long there is between your Kiddush and your meal, even if it's in the same room. And he's telling us here that the washing in between a different room doesn't ruin this requirement that your kiddush be in the place of a meal. Okay, continued, second paragraph of halacha beis. So when does this apply? When does it apply that if I made kiddush in this room and I intended to eat in that room, but then after kiddush I changed my mind and went to a different room? And we said it's not a problem. We said it's a problem. Sorry. When is that true? Benimlach, when I changed my mind after kiddush. If when I made kiddush in this room, I had intended to make kiddush in a different room, in the same house.
You mean to eat in a
different room, I'm sorry, yeah. What did I say?
kiddush?
Right. He made kiddush in one room, having in mind to eat in another room in the same house. You don't have to go back and make kiddush again. If the two rooms, in one house, and the same thing is true from the higher floor to the lower floor, or the lower floor to the higher floor. This is an interesting halacha. Now this
And it goes against some of the principles in the Gemara.
say again?
Does it contradict anything?
No. So the Gemara talked about Rab Anan bar Tachlifa made kiddush, right?
Yeah.
And the light fell. So he went downstairs and made kiddush again.
Didn't mention his intention before.
Didn't mention his intention before. So presumably he thought he was going to eat upstairs. And it's only because he expected to eat upstairs and now moved downstairs, that's why he made kiddush again. But had he had in mind in his kiddush upstairs to eat downstairs, it wouldn't have been a problem. And this is based on the Tosfos' commentary on the Shulchan Aruch yesterday.
But what's interesting is, let's say you can, the intention can only be for you.
Say again?
Like, what's interesting is the intention can only be for you. If I have guests, let's say, and we do kiddush in the living room.
So they have to know that they're eating the other place to begin with, yeah. Yep, this is all based on the Tosfos here. It's also based on the story with the shul, because the guy's making kiddush in shul. They're not eating in the room where he's making kiddush. They're eating in the rooms adjacent, because they know when they're making kiddush, because it's in the same building. They know they're making kiddush and they're eating in another place, and it still counts as kiddush in the proper place, right? The guy's making kiddush for the guest in shul. The guests are not eating in the room that he's making kiddush because you're not allowed to eat in the shul. They're eating in the rooms adjacent to it, which means two different rooms in the same building. If at the time, that's right. If the time at kiddush, this is rationale. Anyway.
So they expanded the Mishnah.
So that based on all these various different incidents, the Tosfos gives that interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
So if I make kiddush in, let's say in the kitchen,
Yeah.
or let's say in the dining room,
And you know you're going to be eating in
we
the
have a
kitchen.
two-story floor,
Yeah.
a house,
Yeah.
and Karen says, "Oh, let's go upstairs."
When did she say that? Before kiddush or after kiddush?
After the kiddush.
So it'd be after the kiddush, which means at the time of kiddush you expected to be eating right there.
Yeah.
And now she decided to go upstairs. You have to make kiddush again.
Because I didn't have it in mind.
That's correct.
Yeah.
You have to make kiddush again, or more simply eat something in where you made and then go upstairs. Eat a cake.
Enough to.
We'll learn how much you have to eat. Yes, we'll learn what you have to eat.
But then everybody needs to eat in that room, right?
That's correct. That's correct. Even the listeners. Okay, look at footnote 6. In this context, maybe keep your finger on the footnotes. Footnote 6. In this context, two apartments in the same building are considered as separate dwellings. You shouldn't think it's right. He says here, upstairs to downstairs in the same house. If you had in mind to begin with that you're going to be eating in another room, it's okay. So the footnote tells us, don't assume that you're in a 10-story building and you're an apartment, A1. You can't now go upstairs to A10,
right,
and make kiddush.
no biblical
Even
homes
like a
had
duplex.
ladders that went
Second?
up to.
Even a duplex, because it's two different dwellings. That's correct. By contrast, many rooms in the same common domain, e.g., separate rooms in a hospital, are considered as different rooms in one house.
Mm-hmm.
So make kiddush in one hospital room, thinking or keeping in mind you're going to be eating in a different room. Okay. But the Alter Rebbe adds in parentheses, back to the main text, it's best not to do this. Because there are those who disagree with Tosfos' interpretation of the Gemara. And they're of the view that even in one house, going from one room to the next is a problem. So because there's a dispute, if you did it already you made Kiddush, had in mind to eat somewhere else, you can rely on the view that says that that's okay, but best not to do so in the beginning. And again, the simple solution is to eat something after your Kiddush and then go eat wherever you're eating.
So this is just the principle of Jesus or something like nature. If it's coming from Tosafot, you know it's not the mainstream.
Not always. Okay,
not always, or is that?
It's very difficult to extrapolate a rule based on this.
Right.
But I will add this. You see that this last line without the rights, that nonetheless it's best not to do it to begin with. You notice that's in parentheses in Hebrew,
okay,
which indicates when the author puts parentheses in the Shulchan Aruch, there's no different ways to think about it. One way to think about it is, and in each context you have to know what he's thinking. But sometimes when he puts it in parentheses, it's because he's unsure. Sometimes he puts it in parentheses because this is his view, different from the views from which he's collecting, different from his predecessors.
Well, we had that yesterday about making Kiddush and Shul, right?
So did he put anything in parentheses there?
No,
I don't think so. So the parentheses specific, right? The Shulchan Aruch, as I mentioned, I think this mentioned last time, that the Shulchan Aruch for the most part is a collection of all of the decisions made by his predecessors, right? So his view is expressed only in the manner in which he collects these views, and sometimes when he's siding between different opinions. But if he puts something in parentheses, it's either because he's unsure about it or because this is actually his view that might be different than his predecessors. I have a feeling that's the case here. That it could be others would say,
okay,
we follow Tosfos. Tosfos says you're allowed to have in mind. So have in mind when you make Kiddush here, it's okay to do it somewhere else. And comes out there and adds, best not to do that because there's a different opinion that says, that's what it would seem to me. That's what it would seem to me.
And drinking,
Does drinking count as a meal? Is that what you're asking?
no, if I drink here, I have to make a bracha on what I'm drinking, right?
Yeah, okay. We're going to, the issue of making a bracha in one room and then move to another, we're going to leave for now, because we're going to come back to it. The Gemara is going to discuss it at length, and we're going to learn about that as well.
I was just wondering why eating is one thing and drinking is another thing.
You're talking about drinking a glass of water now on Tuesday, or you mean like for Thursday, or you mean like Kiddush drinking?
No, I take a coffee in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And then I come here with
Okay.
another coffee.
So let's make this very clear. What you're talking about is a law or discussion in the laws of Birchas Hanenin. Birchas Hanenin is the laws of when I make a bracha over enjoying something, any consumption. And the Gemara is going to discuss that, and maybe we'll get to the Shulchan Aruch as well. Simon Kufayin Ches.
That's what's getting me mixed up.
But here we're talking about specifically the mitzvah of Kiddush. Remember, in Kiddush we have two brachas.
Yeah.
We have Agafen and we have Kiddush. Your Agafen bracha is not a problem because you're drinking a glass of wine. Here it's the other bracha, the bracha of Kiddush, the mitzvah of Kiddush, not the bracha of wine, the mitzvah of Kiddush. Make that distinction. So everything we learn here is unrelated to drinking a coffee in one room and going to another. Because here we're learning specifically about the halacha of Kiddush, that your Kiddush requires a meal, which isn't, in other words, the meal you're eating isn't involved in the brachas you made on Kiddush. Because in Kiddush you made a bracha over Shabbos, and you made a bracha over the wine you're drinking, and Shabbos is Shabbos. You're making another bracha hamoitzi, or mezainis, as we'll learn. Right? So here we're not speaking about the bracha of agafen or the bracha of enjoying food, specifically the mitzvah to make Kiddush. Clear? So the issue of moving one room to the next while you're eating is related, but not the discussion here. We're going to get to that in the Gemara after this section. Okay? Okay, so what do we have? We had the view of Tosfos, which seems to be the dominant halachic view, that if when you made Kiddush, you had in mind to eat in a different room in the same house, then that Kiddush counts. If when you made Kiddush, you thought you were eating here, and then after Kiddush decided, let's go upstairs, then that Kiddush is invalid unless you ate something there. But if you didn't, you have to make Kiddush again when you went upstairs. But if you had in mind to begin with, when you make Kiddush, and I'm going to be eating in a different room in the same house, it's okay. Out there, but added in parentheses, best not to do this because there are those who disagree. Okay. Now, aval but Nibayis from one building to another, one house to another, or one dwelling to another, two apartments in the same building. Or if you're going from your house to your courtyard. Right? In footnote 7, they write, i.e., a courtyard shared with others, or one that is not enclosed, meaning it's not your private residence. If you're talking about your own private residence, then that's just an extension of your house. But if the courtyard is shared by others, right, and let's say there's an Erev and all the rest of it, so you're allowed to carry out there, then there's this issue. Then and the fact that he had in mind when he made Kiddush, to eat in a different building, or to eat in the courtyard, that doesn't count. It's our lachzer lakadesh, and he has to go back. He has to make Kiddush again if he's going to be eating in one of those other houses. Moshe and his bar, as we explained above. Clear?
Yeah.
Clear so far or not?
I think I missed that. So if it's your own courtyard, private, you can.
It's considered part of it. It's like going from one room to another room. It's like one room to another room in the house. So yes, that's okay. So we have three designations. So far we have two actually. Where the third one's going to be introduced. We have two designations at the moment. One is in one house from room to room, and one is from house to house. A courtyard shared by others is in the category of house to house. A courtyard that's only privately yours is considered room to room in the same house. What's the difference? Room to room in the same house, you can have in mind to make Kiddush here and eat there. House to house, even having in mind doesn't help. Okay. Now we add another detail. The Kalmaka, nevertheless, in Bishas Achilosei Sham, if while he's eating over there in the other house or in the courtyard, who Yachalu leaders Mishamas B'Kaim Moshe Kiddush Boy, he can see the location that he made Kiddush in. Afilu derech halayim, even through the window. Afilu mitzvah b'karmai, even part of the place. So I would make Kiddush in my house, and I go to eat in my neighbor's house. It's house to house. I had in mind I'm going to be eating there. And then when I get there, it's a different house, which we said having in mind doesn't help. But because our windows are adjacent, and I can look from when I'm eating in his house, I can look through the window and at least see part of the room in which I made Kiddush. Yeah. Yesh Oimrim, there is one view that says that this satisfies the requirement to make Kiddush in the place you eat, because you can see the place you made Kiddush.
Wait, you have to see the place where you made Kiddush?
Yes.
Not the other way, where you're making Kiddush, seeing the place.
Say again?
Not the opposite direction, where you're making Kiddush, you can see.
Here, no, here talk about it. So read it again. You can read it in English. If when eating one can see the place where he recited Kiddush.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Look in footnote 10 and then 9. Based on section 178.1 and section 195.1, it can be concluded that this leniency, that is, that if I'm in a different house, but if I can see through the window the place I made Kiddush, it counts as being making Kiddush in the right place, because I can see that place where I made Kiddush through the window. This leniency does not apply when a public domain separates between the two places. So if it's across the street, it wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Only if it's side-to-side neighbors.
Okay, I was just gonna say, if I make Kiddush here, I could see the house over there.
That doesn't work. But if you can
Doesn't
see the house next door, yes.
Okay,
I was thinking of my house. Most of us probably have neighbors that you can see right into the other guy's window.
yeah.
Isn't public domain a very controversial?
Yes, I don't think he means a halachic public domain with 600,000 people. I just think he means a shared domain that isn't private.
Okay.
Like that interrupts the
Like a road,
For example,
like
a
you said.
park or road, anything like that. Yeah.
But it's a very odd scenario that they're describing, because you would think if you would just expect, I mean, if you're
Just eat
religious,
something in your
you would-
house.
No, not even that. You would expect your neighbor to do kiddush and take you out of it also. Why
In theory,
not?
all these hypotheticals are like in scenarios, I guess, back in the old day where these things are expensive and wine is scarce, let's just say, even though in some times in history, people drank wine more than water because it was actually more available than water in some places. But let's just assume that wine is scarce and there's a limit. He's got wine, this guy's got bread and
You can.
whatever. All these things are, the Gemara even gets into like scenarios, halacha gets into scenarios where a guy's got $1 left and he could either buy kiddush or a glass, or he could buy a cup of wine or he could buy a candle. Which one should he buy first? Guy's down to that low of an income that he has to decide between kiddush and a candle. This is so out of the realm of our thinking nowadays, thank God. But back in the day, these were things that people considered. Okay, that was number 9. Look at footnote 10. Badei HaShulchan 8:16 states that one must be able to see the area within 4 cubits of the place where he recited Kiddush. Seeing another portion of the room is not sufficient. So now, like this, it gets so detailed. So if I make Kiddush in my house, right?
Yeah.
And I go to my neighbor's house, and I had in mind I'm going to be eating in his house.
Yeah.
I go to my neighbor's house. It's next door, so there's no public space. Our windows are adjacent. I'm eating in his house, and I see through the window of the room I made Kiddush. But the part of the room that I see is more than 4 cubits away from the actual spot I made Kiddush. It says Badei HaShulchan, doesn't count. The place I see in that room has to be within 4 cubits of the spot that I made Kiddush. It's very, very detailed, which means it's a leniency that really you have to rely on if only mamash you need to. Okay.
And
Yeah. So back to the main text. So Yesh Ayman, those that said Kiddush Bakum Sa'ada, that this is considered a Kiddush in the same place. Why? And this opinion borrows from a different law, which is Sheshneim Mekaymis Elu, 2 such places that can see each other through a window are considered Kemokem Echad, are considered one place Le'inyan Kiddush with respect to making Kiddush, because they can see each other. The same way that they constitute one location if we want to combine them in a zimun. Zimun is when more than one person benches together, 3 people together, or 10 people, the details of which are very, again, involved. But broadly speaking, 2 homes that can see each other, they can bench together and make a zimun. So the same way it's together for the zimun, so the same way it's together with respect to Kiddush, and therefore, if in the new house I can see the place I made Kiddush, it constitutes making Kiddush in the place I ate. Okay, and therefore he says, you can rely on this view, the shas hatzchak, in a pressing situation where it's very, very difficult. So again, as I mentioned, between the 2 of you, I have a glass of wine and he has a loaf of bread. We got nothing else available in the house, so I can't carry from your house to your house. I'm no eruv. Fine, so I'll make Kiddush by the window. Make sure you see me, I see you. I make Kiddush, I go to your house, and we have a moitzi together. Okay. So that was, so far, we had, again, the 2 designations. One is one house to another. Putting aside the leniency of the window, one house to another. One cannot make Kiddush in one house and eat in another, even if he has in mind at the moment of his Kiddush to eat in the other house.
Unless he makes Kiddush.
Sorry?
Unless he makes
Kiddush again, right? His Kiddush is not valid, even though he had in mind to eat in the other house.
Right.
Okay.
Does the Kiddush...
That was designation 1. Sorry?
Kiddush, did he have in mind his neighbor for that Kiddush?
We'll get to that.
Oh, all right.
Can I make Kiddush here having in mind someone else who's eating in that
He's
place?
sharing his.
We're going to get to that.
Share his,
We will get to that. We'll get to that. So that was scenario 1. Scenario 2 is different rooms in one house. In that case, there's the leniency, according to the Tosfos, that if I make Kiddush in this room, having in mind to eat in a different room in the same house, then I can carry over. Then that Kiddush is valid. Even though, as Alter Rebbe said, one shouldn't rely on that in the first instance, but there is that view. That's in one house, room to room. I have to have in mind during my Kiddush that I'm going to be eating in that other room.
What if you're eating in the Queen's Palace?
Which is a big room, which is a big building.
It's not very good.
Presumably it's the same thing.
It's the same thing in the hospital.
Yeah, it's a hospital, same thing. That's right.
That's the technical economic condition of people.
That's right.
We're going to also, God forbid, if that have wheelchairs or anything else, someone has to be in another room and want to ensure to include that family.
That's right. That's right. That's a good point. And since you mentioned taking consideration for people's economic situation, especially back in the old day, Shabbos afternoon, God willing, the same thing we did for the last few weeks with Rambam, we're going to be doing next few weeks with Rashi. And we're going to see some of the response where he deals with people struggling with financial pressures and the relationship with the government. It's quite fascinating. So I urge you to join us Shabbos afternoon.
Also, a lot of
Okay.
it, if you think, could be applied to when they're being persecuted.
Yes.
So you did it in one place, had to run.
You have to run. Very good. Exactly right. Yeah. You don't want to draw suspicions. You're making Kiddush in one place, you're eating in a different place. Who knows?
Or go hide somewhere to eat, even in the house.
That's right.
And you don't have to do it again.
Or you know, I just thought of this. If you're one of the crypto Jews in what's it called, the Inquisition in Spain, right? So if you if you were caught, someone saw you through the window holding a cup like that on Friday night, that was persecution for you. Right? Even if you had the shades closed, that would also be persecution. Why is your shades closed every Friday night? What are you doing in there? Right? Now, if I didn't have any meal Friday night in my house, that's also suspicion. Would you guys eat Friday night? All of a sudden, every Friday night you're eating in your basement? So I'm making kiddush in my basement, and then I go upstairs and eat. So as far as the viewer outside sees, a regular family having Friday night dinner. But they don't know I made kiddush downstairs or whatever. That's a good scenario in which this would apply. Making kiddush in the basement, I know I'm going to eat upstairs. Okay, so those are the two scenarios: house to house, or one house, two rooms. Now we come to the third one, which is we're getting closer and closer. Two houses, two rooms in one house, and now within one room. Gimel, mipina lepina babayis echad, from one corner to another in the same room of a house. Shekiddush bezavi yazu, he made kiddush in this corner. Al das, with the intention lechal kan, to eat right here. So I made kiddush in my dining room, expecting to eat at the same spot where I made kiddush. But then, after my kiddush, I decided to eat in a different spot, different corner, in that same room, in that same house. So after kiddush, my wife decides, we have too many guests, I want to rearrange you, I want you to sit over there so you can be more engaged with the guests. I make kiddush at the head table, but after kiddush, while we're washing, the Rebbe decides to rearrange the seating arrangements. Says, okay, I want you to sit in the middle.
Rabbi Marvis in the Buckingham Palace.
Yeah. And it says, afilu traklin gadol, even if you're talking about a very large hall, you do not have to go and make kiddush again, because the entire room is considered one spot, even though I happen to move a different spot in that room.
Which is apparently what happened to Rabbi Johnson Sachs. When he brought him special food and everything else.
Yeah. Look at the footnote number 11. Based on section 178.9, one is considered to be eating in the same place, even though he cannot see the place in that room where he recited Kiddush. Meaning it's an L-shaped room. It's an L-shaped hall. And I made Kiddush in one axis. And then for whatever reason, we moved to the other one to eat. So even though I cannot see the spot I made Kiddush, it's one room, and therefore I can move anywhere within that room, and it satisfies this requirement to make Kiddush in the place I eat.
That's interesting.
That's right.
That sort of contradicts
Exactly.
number 10.
Because that's when you're in different houses. What brings the two places together? When I'm in a different house, what brings the two places together is the visual. So the visual has got to be precise. But when I'm in the same room, what brings the room together? Not the visual. The very fact that it's the same room. So even if I have no visual, it still counts as one room. And therefore satisfies the law that I make Kiddush in one place and eat in another. It satisfies the requirement to make Kiddush in the place that I eat. Right? Because the entire room is considered one spot, one place. Nevertheless, it's best not to do so. And it's best to eat something in the actual spot where you made Kiddush.
And that would be 4 Amos.
Sorry?
Would that be 4 Amos then? Would be considered the same place?
Let's see. Because there are those that disagree with this reading and say that you actually have to be in the same room. So it's based on the Rif's interpretation. Okay, let's look at footnote number 12. Tehillah David 273.1 is one of the earlier commentaries in Alter B'Shulchan states that the stringency of not to do so to begin with, right? He said that if you're in the same room and you make Kiddush in one spot and you thought you were eating there, but then after Kiddush moved over to a different spot, if you had in mind, then for sure it's okay. Because even for one room to another room, if you had in mind, it's okay. Right. So certainly if you had in mind, then one room in the same room, it's certainly okay. But even if you didn't have in mind, you thought you were eating in this spot, and you're moving to the other spot, we said it's okay. But then Alter Rebbe said, nevertheless, don't do this to begin with because there are others that disagree. So this stringency, says the Tehillah David, applies only when one changed his mind and moved to another place in the room. If, however, when one recited Kiddush, he had in mind to eat another place in the room, there's no difficulty in eating that place. Because even if you're in a different room, completely you're allowed to have in mind. Right. So certainly in the same room, that's the point, exactly. So if I knew when I made Kiddush, that after Kiddush, my wife's going to be moving us around, which is not uncommon, by the way, especially if you have a tight place, you don't want to sit everybody down before Kiddush and then make everybody get back up and squeeze their way out to go wash their hands and come back. So very often everybody just congregates around one spot, make Kiddush, go to wash, and then you find your seats. So in that scenario, to begin with, you knew that you were not going to be eating in the same spot where you made Kiddush or where you heard Kiddush. So the Tehillah David is telling us, in that case, you don't even have to worry about this stringency, and that's perfectly fine. The stringency not to rely on it to begin with is only when you didn't know that.
You have in mind.
That's right. Which means a simple solution. If you make Kiddush in your head, in your spot, after Kiddush, your wife tells you, I want you to sit in the middle of the table. How do you cover this stringency? Eat something in that spot and then go. Drink another cup of wine, as we'll see. Eat a little mazonos, and then go to the spot that your wife asked you after washing.
Even if you see that spot?
Even though you
From
see it.
before.
Because you said in the
Because you
first
changed
instance,
your
you shouldn't
mind.
rely on it because you changed your mind. That's correct. If you knew to begin with you were moving, no problem for sure. But you didn't know you were moving. And Alter Rebbe says, in the first instance, you shouldn't rely on this leniency to move. So the simple solution is just to eat something in that spot. Since considering that, thank God, nowadays we have abundance. Okay, we'll stop over here, and God willing, we'll get to more details of the sukkah, and then we'll get to details around like the sukkah when you're making kiddush in one spot and you're moving out. Let's say it's raining, so now you're eating in a different room now, right? So we'll get to that, and we're going to get to how much you have to eat that constitutes a meal in the spot that you make kiddush. More Bez Hashem coming tomorrow. Okay, have a wonderful day, Eden.
So the whole thing is if you make Kiddush, make sure you eat something first. before you do anything
Eat something
else.
directly after.
Yeah.
That's right. So we're going to see also the duration, the time duration between your kiddush and your meal. We're going to discuss that, and we'll discuss how much you have to eat. We're going to get into all that as well. And then we're going to get into also as well, making kiddush for someone else, and they're eating there, but I'm not fulfilling my obligation in that kiddush. Like the guy in Shul, right? He's making kiddush in Shul. He's going home to make his own kiddush later, but it's only the other guys who listen to him that are eating food in the spot of their kiddush, the guests, or in the room adjacent to the Shul. So we'll get to that, God willing, in the days coming.
Oh,
Have a wonderful day, Eden.
Thank you.